y'all had the authority for years to decide your own future here. And as I dug into the laws, the weird, crazy laws in our state, we allow police juries and parishes all over the state to decide what they have. We decided down to the size of TV antennas, to nuclear waste, to coal waste, to the sizes of ditches. So I figured, okay, the parish ought to be able to decide if they want this business activity. And as a fallback to what my citizens demanded of me, and they're still demanding, that if the citizens don't like what the police jury said, then they could bring a vote of the people. So if the police jury in Vernon or Beauregard or Allen decided they wanted this, or let's say they didn't want it, and the citizens say, you know what, there's a plant coming. Someone wants to put a plant here. You guys are fools. Let's have a vote. And I thought that was the most even sequencing of democracy that I could think of. And I got run over in the street like a cat. I mean, I got beat like a baby seal in committee. But I'm not going to give up. But that was the essence of my first bill. House Bill 4 was where each parish could decide their own future. My fallback plan became, okay, we have a thing called local bill. And DeWitt and I did this, and Troy Romero did this. He had a bill for Allen. I had a standalone bill for Beauregard and a standalone bill for Vernon. And Troy Romero had one for Jeff Davis. We all lost in committee. Same thing. We tried to explain that we want our people to decide this, and we were rebuffed. And if you want to know why we were rebuffed, we can talk about that later. But we were told, tough. Someone else will decide that for you. So that was my set of bills, and I fully intend to bring them back next year.
Thank you very much, Representative Owen. Representative Schamerhorn from District 24. Representative Schamerhorn, your legislative efforts focused on other aspects of carbon sequestration, namely eminent domain, pipeline safety, and taxation. You brought bills to authorize liens for victims of CO2 pipeline disasters, to address eminent domain concerns, and levy a tax on carbon pipelines. Could you relate to us tonight what risks or gaps that you focused on addressing?
Thank y'all for coming. Very important. Look, my main issue was property right, okay, and that affects the eminent domain. So I ran a bill for the pipeline to remove the eminent domain on the pipeline, and then I ran a separate bill to remove it for the disposal. So those two bills, to me, look, a lot of people don't understand where I'm coming from. If carbon is coming and the people want it, and they want to sign that lease away and strand their minerals that's below their property, that's up to them. But for myself, I'm not going to sign that lease, because one day I may not, my children may not, but my grandchildren may reap some of the benefit of the oil and gas that's under our feet. I just don't want it on my property. So that's why I ran those two eminent domain bills. If you don't want the pipeline to come through your property that you may have wanted to build your home on, don't sign the lease. That's just the way it is. And that's the main reason I was doing the eminent domain, okay? The other one was taxation. So, say it is coming. Who is providing the extra safety measures to help protect in case there is a problem? I proposed a 5 cents per ton mile of pipeline for disposal. Not for the EOR, which is oil recovery. They were omitted from this. This was just pipelines that were dealing with the disposal of CO2. 5 cents a ton mile. Not a whole lot of money, okay? Not when they're making $85 a ton. We were asking for 5 cents a ton mile. That was going, and it was in the bill to be spent 3 miles on each side of the pipeline. The reason I did the 3 miles is because fire departments could man 24-hour-a-day safety where they needed to be manned. EV vehicles would be provided. Schools could be protected. Nursing homes could be protected with extra devices in case there is a spill. That's why I ran that bill. That bill also went down to think my fourth bill was, first thing though, say there was a ruptured pipe or a gas leak or somewhere or another got out of the ground. I ran a bill to where the victim within a 25-mile radius of that leak would become first lien holder against that company. The reason I did that is because that company could file bankruptcy. Well, by the time it gets down there to the end of all their lien holders, there's no money left. So they get scoop free. So I moved it up there where they would be the first lien holder. And that bill also went down. But look, I represent Sabine, Vernon, and Beauregard to Dry Creek and Quincy on the west side. Mine's like a big horseshoe. But those are the bills that we ran. I'm planning on running the same bills again. It's people that are getting out like this and getting information that will be able to put a little pressure on your senators and your representatives if you're against it, to maybe sway them instead of having a 10-2 vote again. Maybe we can have a 7-5 vote for some of these bills. It's very important. Your input is so important to your representatives and senators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Schamerhorn. Dr. Upton and Deputy Secretary Davidson, we're going to come to you guys. Make sure to stay brief so we can get into the public Q&A. Dr. Greg Upton is the Executive Director of the LSU Center for Energy Studies. Dr. Upton, we will be addressing many economic concerns throughout the night. But starting off, I'd like to ask you, what is the economic benefit to the state from carbon capture sequestration projects? And do they outweigh the environmental and property concerns of Louisiana's residents?
Yeah, thanks, David, for the question. And Chairman Geymann and Senator Reese, thanks for having me in your district. It's an honor to be here. So, as David mentioned, I had the opportunity to lead the Center for Energy Studies at LSU. We were actually created by the legislature back in the early 80s. And really, our function is to provide information. So, do we have all the answers? Of course not. But we try to provide that information and point you in the right direction. And so we'll tell you that of all the things that we've talked about over the years, this has been one of the things that has really been a source of stress for a lot of communities in Louisiana. I'm going to get very briefly economically what's going on in Louisiana and how that more decarbonization is impacting our energy sector. If you go back to 2014, we had about 50,000 workers in the upstream oil and gas extraction sector. Okay, so that's the extraction and services sector. Dollars in investment in the refining of these products, chemical manufacturing, plastics, the LNG export, the export of natural gas in the form of liquefied natural gas that we export not only all over the country but all over the world. And increasingly, when you speak to the companies that are making these investments, they're trying to balance two things. On one hand, of course, we have to stay economically competitive in terms of the cost. And so if we produce these products that are too expensive for that global market, we're of course not going to be able to sell them on the global market. But on the flip side, increasingly customers around the world are asking these companies to document what their carbon intensity is and show what their carbon intensity is relative to competitors around the world. And so this is really the kind of balance that these companies are trying to achieve. And one of the tools in the tool chest is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And so that's when you emit carbon dioxide out of some point source. You capture that, you then transport it to a location either permanently sequester underground, or you're able to utilize that carbon dioxide for some other purpose, and one of those purposes is solar power. So that's the first question is, thinking about what is the investment within this broader petrochemical sector. The other more specific thing to your communities of what are the potential benefits, of course, landowners within the economic activity are going to sign leases. They're going to get lease payments in a very similar way that you're used to oil and gas royalties. There's also the pipelines that pay property tax, as well as the wells themselves that are sequestered that are going to pay those property taxes. And that's the kind of information that if you're interested in, we're happy
Thank you very much for your input, Dr. Upton. Deputy Secretary Dustin Davidson of the Louisiana Department of Energy and Natural Resources. Deputy Secretary Davidson, your department now oversees permitting for Class 6 wells, which are the wells that are required for permanent carbon storage. Please explain what a Class 6 well is, like you're explaining it to a third grader, because I do not know. And what is the permitting process involved in that, and how does the department work to ensure that local concerns are heard?
Thank you all for being here. So the Class 6 process is a type of well that the Environmental Protection Agency has aimed for carbon capture. There are Class 1 through 3. Class 1 is your typical oil and gas. Class 2 is kind of your enhanced oil recovery, or I'm sorry, Class 2 is your injection with brine. Class 3, Class 4 is nuclear waste, which is legal in every part. So if anyone tells you that they sequester nuclear waste underground, they're wrong. Class 5 is kind of your catch-all, right? So that could be a test well, that could be some sort of injection well for some sort of wastewater, some other waste product, but not so deep into the ground. And then Class 6, that's your carbon capture. So the Class 6 well is specifically designed to identify where in the layers of the subsurface there is cap rock. And that cap rock is rock that is solid enough to ensure that there's going to be no migration upward of any sort of material that you put down. In Class 6, that material is carbon, only carbon. You're not allowed to inject anything other than carbon in that process. And so when you think about the Class 6 well, what it really comes down to is making sure that there are no leak paths, whether that's a natural leak path like pulp in the geology, or an artificial leak path or artificial penetration like a old porphyry oil and gas well. So when we at the department permit these wells, what we really look at is we go to the applicant, the company that wants to do it, and we ask them, first of all, make sure your application is correct. It has to be administrative. Don't leave any information out. Don't have us coming back and asking for more information so that you can at least get to the next one. Second, we start our technical review. That technical review is to make sure that they actually define where this carbon is going to go and the impact that it's going to have on the subsurface in terms of the pressure that it's going to put on other areas beneath the surface. Also in that process, we're looking at the groundwater. So if you see in this model, the groundwater is typically closer up to the surface than where you will be for your capture zone or your zone of injection. So we're looking at like 4,000 feet down below the surface, right? But in that 4,000 feet, we want to make sure that there are no areas where that can get up into the drinking water. For us, getting primacy on that program, the main goal is for us is to make sure we don't contaminate drinking water. If we do that, we fail, right? And so we want to make sure that anything we do, if we permit it well, it will not touch the drinking water. So once we go through that technical review, we also look at their geology, make sure that's correct. Then we look at their engineering, make sure the engineering of the well is correct, because that's another component of it as well. You can't just use your typical oil and gas casing for this. There's something called carbonic acid, which is carbon mixed with water becomes corrosive, and that is not good for your typical oil and gas, oil and gas casing that you use. So they use chrome 23 is the number that they use. It's extremely strong and it is resistant to carbonic acid. So they have to use that. We have to make sure that their well is constructed in a way that's going to make sure that there is no leak, not only outside of that casing, but also outside of the concrete surrounding the well. Once you get to that point, we go through a notice to issue permit, where public comment comes to the process. Notice to issue the first permit is just for construction. That does not mean that they're going to reject it. So we go through the process, we have public comment, we engage with the public, and we make sure that any questions that the public has or any technical questions are answered before we even issue that permit for them to construct. Once they construct, we go through pressure testing where they test their intervals of how they're going to inject that carbon. Once they satisfy that, then we can move on and give them the permit to inject. Now, once they inject, the process is not over. They have to maintain control and monitor that well 50 years after that. In addition to having roughly in some cases, $2 million, upwards as much as $35 million in financial security to make sure if anything happens to that well, they are liable to cover for it. And it's not going to come on the state's hands, it's not the state's hands, I mean the taxpayer. So there's a significant amount of progress that goes through this. It's not something that happens overnight. I mean, we're reviewing some, it's taken us 2 years. Some have been in the process with the EPA for 4 that we've been handed. So this isn't something that necessarily happens overnight, but it's a very extensive and long process that we make sure we cross all of our T's and dot our I's and make sure that we're not going to permit anything that's going to provide harm to the public.
I have 2 follow-up questions. Very short answers required, I promise. How is the public notified when there's a time for public hearing for them to come out and make comment in the permit process?
Yeah, so that's actually a big part of what we did in the legislative session, right? We identified that when we first got primacy, we didn't do a good job of notifying the public. Typically, it was in the paper. That wasn't good enough. So what we've done is we put all this information on our website. You can actually look at the permits themselves or the applications themselves on the website. We're putting that information on the website. We're now taking initiatives to reach out to the legislators and let them know that we're going through this process. But then also we had a listserv department where we had interested stakeholders where we sent that information out as well. So we're doing press releases. We're also putting it in the paper. We're reaching out to the legislators. We're trying to do everything we can to make sure that everybody's aware. We're also telling these companies to engage with the community because at the beginning of this process, a lot of companies did not do that. They just showed up in your neighborhoods and they had some process that they wanted to do and you really didn't know what was going on. We're telling them to do that on the front end, let y'all know exactly what they're intending to do in your neighborhoods so that they can understand, or you can understand exactly where these projects are in the process. So that's really where we're at.
All right, second follow-up question. You mentioned that the companies are required to maintain those wells for 50 years. Is the carbon still there after 50 years? And if it is, who maintains it after that? What happens after that?
So after that 50 years, that financial instrument that I talked about, that financial security, depending on how much it is, it goes well by well based on the if it's sequestered. But that money stays with the carbon. And so when that company satisfies their 50 years, we have that money on hand where we can go in and manage if there's an issue with the well, we can go back in and recap it, or we're hoping that there isn't an issue. But if there's anything that sort of happens after that 50 years, we have the ability as a department with the funding available to go in and take care of that problem.
So after that 50 years, who is responsible for making sure the wells are being checked and all that? Is that the state?
That would be us.
Okay. How often will they check those wells? Is that a monthly, an annual?
So we haven't gotten to that 50 years yet. We haven't permitted the well just yet, but ideally, yes. I mean, we look at it as a similar situation we do with oil and gas wells, where we get out there and we're monitoring our operators as much as possible. We're making sure that they're following the rules and our regulations. It is a process that, again, we're still reviewing. It can be as frequent as the community needs it necessary, right? I don't think there's any one answer to how to do this. I think we're open to any sort of suggestions on what people want to see, but at the end of the day, we're looking at it similar to our oil and gas process. We're going to maintain enforcement mechanisms after going out and reviews as well.
So it's important that the public continue to stay on with their state legislators in this process.
Absolutely. Not only state legislators, stay with the department as well. I mean, we frequently do calls about orphan oil wells, and that's something that we continue to monitor to this day. We do this as the same thing. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to call us and have an issue with the well and think we should come out and check that. We want to know that. We have to know that, because if not, then we're not doing our job.
All right. I'm going to ask 2 questions, and then after that, we're going to go to our public question and answer time. Question number 1, this is for everybody. What is the primary goal of carbon capture and sequestration in Louisiana? Is it to reduce emissions, attract new industry, meet federal mandates, or is it something else? Representative Geymann, could you start with that, please?
It's my understanding, I'm going to stand up in my back hurts, I don't have a back on my stool, but it's my understanding that originally this was a mechanism to reduce the greenhouse gas for the climate change agenda decades ago. And then it has become recently a tax credit driven process where industry is able to get paid to sequester the CO2 in the ground. So it's a combination of both. Overall, but it's my opinion, this is my opinion, right now it's more about the money, it's more about the ability of the industry doing the project to reap benefits financially that it is about saving the planet. And that's my personal opinion. I'm just expressing that. But that, to me, that's where this is at this current time.
All right, and so I'm going to ask another question, and you guys are free to answer this one. With all of the industry interests in carbon capture and sequestration, can I call that CCS, by the way? My Lord, I'm struggling with sequestration. All right, there you go. We'll call it storage now, okay? So, with all the industry interests in CCS, hallelujah, there must be, as you mentioned, a lot of money coming from somewhere. So let's get to the elephant in the room on that. Where's the money coming from? Anybody?
So yeah, I can start with that. So the federal government, starting with George Bush, passed what was called the 45Q tax credit.
Which Bush?
The second Bush.
Okay.
Yeah, George W. Bush. And he passed what was called the 45Q tax credit. And what that was for is for sequestration of carbon dioxide when you get that tax credit.
Well, that's all I want to know.
So that's number one. And then the second thing, of course, is these companies are making these decarbonization commitments. They're trying to reduce the carbon intensity of their products. And they're selling these products in these global markets that again are asking them to document. So those are the two pieces, the tax credit and then those global markets.
All righty, thank you very much. We're about to begin some public Q&A. Ms. Melissa, are you ready over on this? Oh, you want to sit? Representative Schamerhorn, go ahead and speak up.
To answer your question more directly,
Yes.
who pays for this?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody that pays taxes.
Well, no, I just want to say one quick thing about.
Just about to preach, guys.
I want to say one quick thing about 45Q. This effort has forced me into learning things I never had a reason to learn. I've never heard of 45Q until about a year ago. I started digging into it, no pun intended. Is there any other option inside of 45Q besides burying it? And there is. Federal government provides for putting it in concrete, putting it in fertilizer. There's places you can put it that are not in your feet. Now, I've asked this to some industry people, and they're smart people, and they say, yes, Representative Owen, you're right, but it's not as cost effective for us. What that means is it's cheaper for us to throw the garbage out the window than it is to drive up the street and put it in a dumpster. It'll take some effort to refit concrete plants, to build fertilizer plants. But there are ways to get 45Q tax credit. The question has to become what we as a society want to sign up to. Do we want to sign up to the risk? Do we want to do something else? And that's